Hey guys, I'm Sun. I'm a privacy and security researcher, and you're watching the Privacy Guides. In last episode, I started a Borg mini-series, and we went about setting up Borg using Vorta. If you haven't watched that episode, or if you don't know what Borg is at all, and if you're not super tech savvy, today's episode might be a little overkill, so I might recommend watching that one first. Now, it took forever for me to actually publish this second episode, and there is a reason. Number one reason, actually there are reasons. Number one reason is I was about to publish when an upstream problem with Homebrew occurred. Homebrew, if you don't know about Homebrew, it's a package manager for macOS. They decided to deprecate all formulas that depend on proprietary casks. And OS X Fuse that is used to mount the kind of weird file system that Borg creates, well, OS X Fuse was removed and deprecated from Homebrew, and that created a whole bunch of problems. So yeah, we got to work. I actually joined forces with the people at Borg, and we created with Manu of Borg Base and Vorta a special tapped formula that works fine. So that really put a bottleneck in me publishing this episode. But the other reason is I actually went about creating the reference material for the whole series. So I have 4 amazing, at least to me, pieces of reference material that have been published to sunknudsen.com. And I decided to break things up a little bit more. Here's my train of thought. Some of those episodes are becoming building blocks for future episodes, or some past episodes, such as the one on how to set up a strong swan server, is a building block for one of the Borg episodes. So I was left thinking about how I could structure this information, and I'll kind of show you what I mean here. So say we have this episode here on how to configure a hardened Debian server. That is a prerequisite to self-hosting our own Borg server. So say I have this follow-up episode on how to self-host a hardened Borg server. Well, it now have in the requirements something that I've labeled with a little package, building blocks that you guys need to follow first. And so now the reference material is becoming building blocks that we can use to build more elaborate strategies, such as, which will be the which will be the last episode of this mini-series, how to configure Strong Swan client on headless Debian-based Linux computer. And what I mean here actually is we're going to be using a Raspberry Pi. This is actually the Flickr case, which is amazing, by the way. We're going to be self-hosting our own Borg server on a Raspberry Pi in this beautiful aluminum case. And this is going to punch through NAT using a Strong Swan client that is running on this that connects to a Strong Swan server. That means that once this is configured, using Ethernet, this can be sent to someone halfway across the world, and that person just have to plug it in, and then we can back up to that, which is super cool. So I'm going to get into all of those fun details in a second. But yeah, I've been away, but I've been pretty hard at work. So in today's episode, we're going to set up Borg using command line. That's kind of the way it was intended, without using a graphical user interface. That being said, there are a few caveats, and I'll get to those in a second. But before I get to that, I just want to mention that in last episode, we configured our Borg, through Vorta backup strategy to back things up onto Borg Base. In today's episode, we're going to back things up to rsync.net. rsync.net is another provider, similarly to Borg Base, so it's a for-profit provider that is specialized in giving us access to SSH file systems or Unix file systems. And the one really interesting thing with rsync.net is their whole infrastructure is based on ZFS, a technology that was developed by the people in the days of Sun Microsystems. It's now open source and owned by Oracle. And the ZFS has amazing properties. So when considering Borg Base, I actually got in touch with Manu, and I asked him a few questions. I was like, hey, what kind of hardware are you using to store our data? Is it redundant? Is it vulnerable to bit rot. And what Manu said is that Borg base uses RAID 6. What that means essentially is that 2 drives per cluster can fail and data is still recoverable. That being said, RAID does not have a built-in way to detect anomalies. And that's where rsync.net using ZFS really shines. And I actually got on the phone, or actually on a video call with John, who is the founder and CEO of rsync.net, and I asked him a bunch of questions about ZFS. But in a nutshell, rsync.net uses clusters of hard drives in the context of ZFS between 12 and 15 drives, and they're configured using RAID Z-tree, which essentially means that 3 drives per cluster can fail and data is still recoverable. Now, on top of that, ZFS has a really interesting property where it's able to generate hashes. Maybe I'm not using the right word here, but yeah, maybe I should create an episode on this, but maybe in the future. Anyways, ZFS has a way to detect when anomalies occur. So it's possible to ask the file system to detect anomalies and fix them from, those parity drives, if that's the right word. Okay, so yeah, I still have a lot to learn about RAID. By the way, in next episode, when we're going to self-host Borg on a 1984 VPS, well, 1984 uses RAID 10, which in this configuration can have one drive fail per cluster. So essentially 1984 is not too bad. It uses RAID 10, which gives it mirroring capabilities, meaning the data is on 2 separate hard drives, and it also uses striping so that it has more performance. Then Borg base can lose 2 drives. rsync.net can lose 3 drives. So rsync.net is clearly the winner when it comes to data integrity and making sure that the data will last a very long time. So all that said, wow, that's a lot of information. Let's jump in today's episode. So today's episode is about configuring a Borg client on macOS using command line. And there are a whole bunch of little quirks here that I'm gonna discuss those as usual. I'm not thinking a lot of people want to set things up like this. This is pretty overkill, but the process of setting it up is actually super insightful to understand how things work. And that is what the Privacy Guide series is all about. So let's jump in. So steps 1 to 4 are only required if using Borg base or rsync.net. I put instructions for both. It's possible to do everything we're doing today and have a Borg base backend. We're going to do it today on rsync, just to spice things up a little bit. So first things first, if we're going to be using Borg base or rsync, which is the case, we need to go about creating a set of private and public keys. One that is called Borg, and the other that is called Borg append only. I mentioned in last episode that Borg has a really cool feature that allows the client, so the Borg backup client that's running on our Mac, to be able to back things up to the cloud, but not delete things from the cloud. And that's what is the append only mode, and it also needs its own keys. The cool thing with that as well is we can create a set of SSH keys that will not need a passphrase, and that's kind of like a prerequisite if we want to schedule things, and we'll get to scheduling at the end of today's episode. Woo! Okay, so we want to go about creating that folder, and then we want to go into that folder. So I've done that already, and here are the keys. So I went about running this command here, and then running this command here. Please follow the instructions. This first one here is configured using a passphrase, and we can generate one using OpenSSL. And the second one here does not have a passphrase. I went about doing this, and by the way, super shitty passwords on this demo computer. Yours should be a gazillion times longer, but okay. So I went about creating a few things here. So those are my credentials. And if I go into server, I have all of those SSH keys, passphrases that are all ready for us to jump in. Okay, so this is what you guys should be doing if you're using Borg base, but as we're using rsync.net, we can go to step number 4. So we're gonna start by creating a few temporary environment variables. So here they are. Borg username, that's the username when you sign up for rsync.net. Borg storage, quota. So I have an rsync.net account that has a 500 gigabyte quota. And this here is the host name that was provided when signing up to rsync.net. So the first thing that we want to do is generate an authorized keys files. Now, compared to Borg-based that has this really nice website, good job menu on creating the user interfaces for this, rsync.net is really lower level. It's pretty raw. So we have to actually upload our own authorized keys to the rsync.net file system, and that's how we tell it when to authorize Borg in its standard mode and when to authorize another set of instructions in append-only mode. That wasn't the best phrase, but I think it will be enough. So running this command here will create a file on the desktop, and this file here, well, you know what? Here. Jeez. Okay. So this is what the file looks like. So essentially, it's an authorized key file. It uses the command syntax to tell it that when Borg, so when we log in using the Borg private key, we're only allowed to run this command. And when we actually log in with the Borg append only private key, well, we actually have it running in append only mode, meaning with this private key, it is not possible to delete data. So once this is done, next up, we need to upload that to rsync.net. So I'm just going to clear this here and type enter. And as you've seen in previous episodes, I'm now using Little Snitch on this demo computer kind of to evangelize the fact that application layer firewalls are pretty essential. So yeah, okay, I'm going to allow this. It's going to ask me for my rsync.net SSH key. So I can go here. This is it. I'll copy this and I'll paste it here, enter. And this will have created the authorized keys on the rsync.net file system. So next up, we want to install Homebrew. So I've done that to speed things up here, but you would want to paste this and run it. It takes a little while. Once it's installed, really important, we want to disable brew analytics. And then here is all of this stuff I was mentioning at the beginning of this episode. Things have become a little complicated because of this upstream change at Homebrew, but we went about fixing this, so please follow those steps. So first step here, we want to install the OSX Fuse cask. When using application layer firewalls such as Little Snitch, I tend to just allow things for 10 minutes when I know that it's an ephemeral rule, meaning that once we're done installing this, we will likely never need those rules again. Keeps things tidy. So as usual, it updates Homebrew and then it downloads a whole bunch of things. As I am aware of what's happening here and those curl requests and others have to do with what's happening here, I feel comfortable accepting it. As usual, super shitty password here. This is a demo computer. Yours should be much more elaborate. But nonetheless, now this has been installed. Next up is we're going to be installing Borg Backup using the official Borg Backup Fuse formula that's being tapped. I'm actually part of that new open source project. So yeah, if you want to look it up, you can go on GitHub. I have all kinds of links there in the heads up. So I am going to authorize this. There are a whole bunch of dependencies for Borg, including Python. So all of this stuff is being installed right now. So by the way, while this is happening, next up here is an actual project that I have developed explicitly for my own use case and to share with you guys. When we want to schedule backups using Borg, meaning that we want those backups to run on, say an hourly frequency. Given how macOS Catalina works, probably the same as well, actually, I'm not sure about Bixer. By the way, I don't know much about Bixer, so this here is proven to work on Catalina. But anyways, when allowing, okay, so say the terminal here, the terminal. If you set up Borg backups using command line, the terminal needs to have access to your documents, for instance, to your desktop, so to privilege paths, which means that in order to allow this, you need to give special permission to the whole terminal to access those files. That is not very safe. And when scheduling backups, this gets even more sketchy. So in order to mitigate this, I created a new native app called Borg Wrapper, and it's essentially a native app written in Swift. The code is like super lean, so you can have a look. You can go on my GitHub, so github.com/sunknutson/Borg Wrapper. And essentially the wrapper is created in a way where it will call Borg, one layer under, but the thing that is authorized to access the files is actually Borg wrapper. So it allows us to really limit the attack surface, making sure that we don't need to allow the terminal, or even worse, allow the shell access to those privileged paths. Okay, so all of this here has been installed. Next up, we're going to install this Borg wrapper project. By the way, if you're of the more paranoid type, I also signed DMGs that are available on GitHub using my GNUPG key. So that's something that you can confirm to make sure that I am really the one behind this build. So, all right, this is going to be installed. That shouldn't be too long. Okay, perfect. Okay, next up, we want to configure Borg. So this this step here, step number 8, is we're essentially, let me clear the terminal. We're essentially creating a random password using OpenSSL, and we're storing it in keychain under, the label Borg passphrase. That means that we're going to be able to automate things so that scheduled backups can run automatically and have access to the passphrase. Now, next step here is we need to initialize the Borg repo. So this here will load the Borg passphrase into Borg_pass command. So this is done. Now we're telling Borg to use the Borg private key. And now this one here is one that is a little different since we're using rsync. So we want to make sure that all of this stuff here is replaced by our rsync account. So going up here, it will be this. So username at hostname :backup, enter. So now this here should initialize the Borg backup. By the way, I'm always a little nervous. Those tutorials take a huge amount of time to put together. But okay, this looks like it's working. So if we go into server, this is using the Borg private key. So SSH Borg, I can copy this and paste it here, and hopefully this will work. Whew. Oh man, this always makes me a little nervous. Thank you so much. Okay, so it actually worked. Woo, okay, good. So we've just initialized the Borg backup using keyfile Blake2. What that means is that the configuration for Borg actually includes the key and the passphrase that we generated using OpenSSL randomly is stored in the keychain. That means that you guys need to back up those two different paths. I usually back things up on little SD cards or on USB thumb drives. I actually back those things up using the VeraCrypt backup strategy that I've mentioned in the past. I'll link that in the description. So when I go running and stuff like this, I always bring that with me because that's my key to the cloud backup. Okay, so now we need to set up a bunch of temporary environment variables. So we're going to start by setting up, and actually I'll clear this, setting up the Borg repo. Again, this here is what we need to put. We need to put the, sorry about this scrolling here, guys. This at the host name, enter, okay. Now, whoops, okay. And then we need to set up the backup name. So this is a MacBook Pro. So I'm just saying user. So it's going to be Sun Knutson user here equals this, and then dash MacBook dash Pro. Okay, now we're going to be creating a few files. Those are actually the files that are doing most of the heavy lifting. So they're interfacing directly with Borg. So this here is the actual backup file. That's very similar to what we did in the context of the Veracrypt backup episode. So if you want to add other paths, I'm doing this here using VI, so it's a little nerdier, but you could also open that in an editor of your choice. So let's actually do this. So instead of VI, I'm going to open this in Visual Studio Code. So Visual Studio Code comes with a helper command called code, and that will actually open that file. Okay, that will actually open that file here. And this is something that might be, oh, you see actually Visual, Little Snitch is so cool. It gives me so much perspective on what's going on behind the scenes. So this, I don't know what it is, but I'll block it for 10 minutes. And this, I'll block it for 10 minutes too. Okay, so here you could add additional paths. Now the important thing is, say we were adding another path here, you want to make sure that you add a backslash first. That's a way to tell it that this is all the same command. But okay, for the time being, we're just going to back up the .ssh folder and the keychain, and that's cool for today's episode. Okay, now step 12, we can go about creating this little helper code. And create this code here, which is used to check the integrity of the backup. And then this one, which is used to restore files. I'm going to demo those in a second, so bear with me here. And now this one here, which is used to prune the backups, keep things tidy. Now we want to make sure that we create a special log folder. When using Borg wrapper, it will log things to that specific path. And all right, we can now open Borg wrapper for the first time. So when we open Borg wrapper, given the app is developed outside the Apple developer program, it's developed by myself, we need to explicitly authorize it. So if you say OK, then if you go into System Preferences, Security and Privacy, by the way, you'll see that File Vault is not on here, and I can already imagine some will criticize me for this. I have a bug where I cannot enable File Vault on this external drive without sometimes the whole thing becoming corrupt. So I haven't enabled this yet because I'm super scared. When I started the Privacy Guides project, it actually locked up on me 3-4 times. I got in touch with Apple. They weren't able to help. So that's why File Vault is not enabled. It should always be enabled on your computers. So going to General, Open Anyway, and Open. As you can see here, Borg wrapper also is able to display notifications. So I've developed it in a way where when a backup starts, this will show up. And when it ends, it will say that the backup completed or failed. So we want to allow those. And now it is initiating the backup. So I need to authorize Borg wrapper in Little Snitch to access this host. And I'll allow this permanently as I know what's going on there. Let me just look at how much time I have left on the camera. Whew, 23 minutes. Okay. Maybe we'll be able to pull this off actually in 30 minutes without the camera cutting on me. So we did all of this stuff here. The next step here is, well, you see the first backup is now completed. If I click on this, by the way, I've developed it in a way where it's just going to open this nice little log and we can see what has happened, the files that were added, and that it was actually completed. Okay, next up, we want to schedule a backup. So we're using launchd to create a backup and set things up so that it backs up every hour. So that's what we're seeing here. So minute 0, that means every minute 0 of every hour backup. And when the computer is sleeping, when it wakes up from sleep, it will run a backup as well. Okay, so this here is a way for us to actually run a backup manually. So we just have to run borg-backup.sh. Perfect. Okay, so we can see done, so that is cool. Next up, if we want to list all of the available backups that we have, this is used for that. All right, so we can see here that we have 2 different backups. Check, that is used to check the integrity of the backups. So if there's a problem, say someone deleted a file, or if there's some bit rot going on at the other end, this will warn us that something has become incoherent. So that is very helpful. And then that last one here is what we use to restore files. So when running this, I might not get this on this computer as I have installed OS X Fuse in the past. You might have an other little thing to authorize, as we've just installed a third-party extension. So if this happens to you, you just need to follow those steps here, and that should be cool. That should be good. So, but given I've done that in the past while rehearsing for today's episode, this didn't happen to me. So I can see the 2 backups here once I'm done. So if I would want to restore a file, I just double click on this, and then I can kind of navigate through things and drag and drop to the desktop. Very similar, by the way, to the Veracrypt backup episode. Veracrypt also uses Fuse. Okay, so once I'm done here, I just press enter, and that gets us out of there. And the last one is prune. So given Borg backups uses deduplication, it will create multiple backups at different points in time. So here we need to have the Borg passphrase. Prune will actually keep in the context of the configuration that we have up here. So let's have a look. Prune will keep the last, keep hourly backups for the last 24 hours, keep daily backups up to the last 31 days, and then keep weekly backups for 52 weeks, and keep monthly backups forever. So what we can see here actually is that it went about removing one of those 2 backups. So if I use list, we'll see now that we only have 1. So it has kept essentially 1 backup for today. Why? Because when we look at this configuration here, prune, we can see that it will keep 24 hourly backups, but we're in the same hour, so it's going to keep 1. So that's pretty much it. That's all I have for you guys today. I mean, this episode, as some of you are probably thinking, is pretty hardcore. That being said, once it's configured, the Borg wrapper is really great to have a really secure approach to automating those backups. It's using command line, so we have a lot of control over it. If you guys like a graphic user interface, Vorta may be for you. I know I like doing things a little bit lower level in the stack. So this, what I've just shown you, is actually what I'm using personally, and I super dig this approach. So that's all I have for you today. In next episode, we're going to set things up in a way very similar to what we did today, but using our own version of Borg running on a virtual private server in the cloud. So stay tuned. I'll see you soon. Bye.